First off, I want to say I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just somebody who loves numbers, and I love what the S&P 500 has done over the last 100 years. Somebody recently asked me, first of all, they thanked me for giving all this information out for somebody in their 20s, because I always run it for 35 or 40 years. They said, "What about somebody that's over 40? Could you run some numbers, or how would that work out?" First of all, I want to have you look at the spreadsheet in front of you. These are the average returns for each of the years beginning in 1929, the 10-year average, 20, and so on. I want you to notice something. This 10-year average, you could run into some really bad years. Like 1929, the average was 4.54, because if you take all these right here and average the 10 years, you're going to come out with 4.54. But there was even a decade that was even worse than that. That was 1999 to 2008 because of the down years there. But the lowest you're going to find for a 10-year average is 0.67. The average was 12.17 if you go down all the way through here. But you can find one that's only 0.67. And even a 20-year average, you can find one, even though the average is 12.51. Here's 1929, only 6.46. So that's why I really like to run the numbers for 30 and 35 years, because look at the difference. The 30-year average and even the 35-year average, you're going to come out with 11.15 uh, as the lowest average you're going to find this whole column. So hopefully this makes sense to you. But I do want to run some numbers for somebody that's a little bit farther along in their working career and have a shorter time frame. But I want you to realize that 10 and 20-year averages, if you run into a bad stretch of a 10 or 20-year, it could really knock down your totals in the end. But if you can stay with it for 35 years, look at this. The lowest average was 11.15% interest for that whole 35-year period. Why? Because the market always seems to come back. I just want people to see these numbers. Now, what I want to do is run some numbers here for you. For somebody that's, let's say somebody has a beginning balance of, let's just say they've been able to, they're 40 some years old, they've been able to accumulate $50,000 in their nest egg, and we want to inflate that by 3%, and we're going to say they can put in 300, let's say $400 a month, which if they're making 42,000, 10% would be 350. Let's stick with the 350 a month. And I want you to look at these numbers. Beginning 1929, if you would have done this starting with 50,000, look at those initial years. Even though you're putting in all this money, uh, your balance is actually going down because the market was going down. So if you are only in it for 10 years, you're going to only have 116,000 to show for it. But I want to run it for every single year for 10, 15, 20, 25, and so on. And you're going to see just uh, how the importance is for having 30 and 35 years, but it can be doable if you have a shorter time period, especially if you already have some money built in. In this case, I put in 50,000. We'll change those numbers in just a second. Takes a little bit longer because it's calculating for all the years from 10 out to 40. But I want to specifically look at somebody that's in their 40s. I want you to look at the 10-year return. The minimum you have is $83,504 after investing $350 a month, increasing that by 3% a year, and you're beginning with 50,000. So you wouldn't really be doing too good for that 10-year period. In the worst case scenario, again, this is in the last basically 93 years. I did it from 1929 on. I usually do it from 1923, but I wanted to hit these bad years right off the bat just to show you. The median would have been 206,000. This is after 10 years. So you could actually have a down decade where you start with 50,000, you put in all this extra money, and you still only end up with 83,000. In the case of 1929, you have 116,000. After 15 years, the minimum would be 175,000. 1929 would be 178. So you're really looking at probably getting to 20-year before you even start seeing some real improvement. So if you're in your early 40s and you can have 20 years, and you had this kind of scenario, starting with 50,000 and investing 350 a month, 3% increasing that, you're going to have a minimum of 336,000. The median would be 765,000, and the maximum would be 2.109. Again, it depends on what's happening those initial years when you first start out, because this 50,000 could be taking a real hit by these down years if you had a string like 1929. This is why I'm really want to look at the 35 and 40 year period, or 30 and 35, because it takes a while for some of these to kick in given certain time frames. Let me just bring you back and show you this. Let's see here. Here's the range here. That's not the one I'm looking for. That's not the one I'm looking for. Bear with me here. Here we go. These are the returns. If you run into a bear market where you're having some down years and you're only in it for 10 or 15 years, if you're in your 50s and run into a down market, you could really be hurting. But if you can have 30 or 35 years, that's why I always like to run it for 30 and 35 years, because that's when you get these kind of numbers returning 11% in the lowest case scenario. But if you only have 10 or 20 years, it depends on what the market's doing those initial years, what's happening. If you start like right in here, 1998, you're going to hit this buzzsaw, 2003 down years and down 37%. And if you do that first 10 years of contributing the money that you're contributing, you're going to possibly not have near the balance that you'd like to have. Let's go back to look at the numbers again. let's see, 25 years, you'd be up to a minimum of 709,000. So really, if you start out with 50,000 and do this kind of scenario, you could end up in pretty good shape after 20 and 25 years, the median being 1.430 and median for 20 years would be 765,000. Again, some of these minimums are kind of tough to take if you only have 10 or 15 years, but I did want to run some numbers for this individual to ask about this. If you have 100,000, let's see the difference, what that would make. If you're in your 40s and you're able to accumulate 100,000 already, same scenario, let's go up to $400 a month, increase it by 3% a year. Let's increase this and see where a person might be given this scenario in a 10, especially the 15 and 20 year. 10 year, you're probably going to get burned if you have a down decade. But if you can be in it for 20 years, if you're in your early 40s and have 20 years, then the S&P 500 could really come through for you, and especially 25 and 30 years and more. So you start with 100,000. Let's look at the 15 year. I'm just don't even want to look at the 10 year because it's so possible to run into a decade like this. But the minimum for a 15 year period, given this scenario, starting with 100,000, putting in $400 a month, increasing it by 3% a year, the minimum you'd have is 250,000, which is right here, 1929. Again, 1929 was such a horrible stretch there for a 10 and 15 year period. But if you discount that, maybe the next lowest might be some of these other ones. But the median would be 649,000. Again, given the scenario of starting with 100,000 and continuing to invest $400 a month, 20 years, you're looking really good. Then you're getting up to the median of up over 1.279 million. Again, that minimum is this one right here, and the ones following. 1930 were kind of low in 1931. But I think if you go down through here, you're not going to see too many other. Well, I guess 1955 you were down to 548. But you can just see it's kind of iffy those initial years if you're already in your 40s. And that's why I really like to see people get started in their 20s. But you can do it if you monitor what's going on those initial years. If you've already got some build up in your nest egg, in this case 100,000, and you monitor what's going on. I don't like to time the market. That's why I like to people just to put it in the S&P 500 and stay with it. But I did want to run the numbers for you for a 20 and 25 year period. If you have 10 and 15 years, I'm a little bit leery of recommending the S&P 500 all the way through because of what you might run into if you have a decade like some of these down decades, even let's see what 1973 would have done. I'll just do it this way. 1973 and 74, beginning with these down years, starting with 100,000. Look, the first couple of years here, even though you're putting in $400 a month, increasing that by 3% a year, you're down to less than what you started with. I always highlight it in yellow. The 100,000, you're down below that. It does come back if you give it time. If you have 20 years, look at this, $1.434 million. That initial 10 and 15 years is trying to come back from being down, down, and down there, and it takes a little while to build back up. But if you have 20 or 25 years in this scenario, 1973 and 74, which is more recent, it's probably better to look at the more recent ones than the Depression years. But even 73 and 74, it'd take you a while to get back to up over $1 million, even starting with 100,000. You can see 1.434 million there. So if you have 20 or 25 years and already have a nest egg built up, the S&P looks like it could really work even in some of these down years. Let's just look at 1975. I want you to watch this numbers here. Once we get by 1973 and 74, I want you to watch the 20-year average. 1975, jumps up to $2 million. Again, 1973, 1.434 after 20 years and 3.6 after 25. But if you're in your 40s and have 20 years and you run into some down years like this, if you can stick with it for 20 years, it looks like you're okay, but 15 years will be a little bit questionable. But look at the difference. If you can get by these two initial down years, 75, $2 million, 25 years, $7 million. The S&P 500 can really reward you, especially if you don't have some down years, but especially if you have 30 or 35 years. Again, this video was basically for somebody that was in their 40s and only had 20 or 25 years. So hopefully these numbers make sense to you and can help you understand what the S&P 500 can do for you, giving most decades, most scenarios. The only times you might be getting hurt in 1973. Let's look at one other one. 1999, 1998. You with 100,000, you're okay, even though you had these down years. After 20 years, you'd have 704,000. 1999. 574. Why? Because you're hitting these years are getting closer and closer to when you start. In 2000, 669, because you're getting by some of these years by then. 10 years, not good. 15 years, not real great. 20 years, 669 is not bad. But hopefully these numbers make sense for you. So somebody that's over 40 and still can have 20 or 25 years, you can still make this S&P 500 really work for you. Unless, of course, you get a bunch of down years and nobody knows the future, but I'm just running the numbers for you. Again, our channel is called $1 Million Made Easy. Please consider subscribing. Tell your friends about this channel. Like this channel. I want to get this information out to as many people as possible. Thanks for watching.